In this video, we're going to make a simple Lua function to randomly move a unit around from its current location. So at the beginning of a scenario, rather than have this sub always be in the same spot, we can make a little function that we can give it some parameters and it'll move it around based on what we want it to, based on what we put in the parameters. So my original idea on this was that any unit has a latitude and longitude associated with it. I was going to add to both of those just sort of a random number, 0.15 or something like that, would move it over a little bit. But then I was thinking that I'd really rather be able to control how many miles away I want it to be able to be randomly located. And poking around a little bit, I found in the Lua documentation some stuff about the reference point. So you can create a new reference point. And one of their examples was that you can create a new reference point that's relative to an existing unit that's at a certain bearing from that unit and at a certain distance. And so when you think about what that means, that in the game, you could create something that say, I want it to move this unit anywhere randomly up to 100 miles anywhere around it, or you could say from a bearing minimum of 0 to 90, and then it would be anything that's northeast and then up to a random number of miles. So that seemed like a pretty good idea, so let's poke around with that and see what we can figure out. So I already have the Lua console open. We'll open that up and let's see, move this over a little bit so we can see what's going on. That is not what we want. And I've already put in a couple of different parameters. One of the things I want to check when you place the unit, assuming it's a sub or a ship, especially a sub, is that I want to place it at a place that's below a certain depth. You wouldn't want if it's a sub, you wouldn't want to end out over here. Most of this stuff is 70 or 80 feet deep. You wouldn't want to place it there. You'd want to check the depth before you put it in there. So there's a random BIOS script that I've worked on before, and I stole some of the ideas from it, where it's checking the elevation of the point to see if the elevation is below a certain depth, and if so, then we'll go ahead and put the random biologic there. So let's see here. So I've put in some random things based on the bearing that you can set the reference point at. I think we should have a minimum and a maximum bearing. So you could have the minimum bearing could be 1 and the max could be 360, and that would be anywhere in a circle around it. But you could also say the minimum is 90 and the max is 91, and then I think you would get a line going out that would be where the random location would be selected at. So it seems like it gives you some control over where you're going to put it. So in there I'm going to have those be called B-min for bearing minimum and B-max for bearing max. Then the distance, which would be it'll be a random distance from where the unit is located. So I'm saying here it'll be up to 100 miles, and then I've got the unit and the side. I just have these defined as variables just to make them a little bit easier to put in some code. So now if we go back to the command docs, and we're going to copy this example just to see what it's going to do and see how it's going to work. Paste it. And let's see, this bit at the end that's clear equals true. I'm going to just delete that. I don't think it's necessary. So distance here, we're defining that as the variable distance. Bearing. So that's... I think we're going to want to set that to a random number. So we're going to do math.random, and then we'll say it's going to be from 1 to whatever the variable is that we set at. And actually, let's make that into a variable. We'll call that local D. We'll end up with 2D's distance, and maybe we'll call that local M for miles. And then we'll do another one that's going to be the bearing, and we'll call that B. And it's going to be another random number, and it's going to be between Bmin and B max, and that'll be the bearing. And that's all we need for now, I believe. We can change this relative to, that's going to be relative to the unit that you want. So we're going to call that relative to unit. We've done the same thing with the side. That's just going to be side. And now bearing is going to be B, and the distance is going to be M. So now if I run this, it should just make one point. I can also give the point a name, and we're going to call this possible, because it's going to be a possible location for the unit when we move it. All we're doing right now is just playing around with the reference point, though, to see if it'll do what we want it to do. So if I run this, I should get one new reference point that's going to be, it could be anywhere in a circle around it, out to 100 miles. And there it is right there, and it's named possible. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So that was interesting. Since there's only one, it didn't really give us a chance to see whether or not the randomness is really working. So let's go ahead and put this in a for loop. And that's going to be for I equals, we'll say 20. So for I equals 1 through 20, go ahead and do this 20 times. And then we'll put an end at the bottom of it and press run, and I should get 20 points. Look at that. And those are all pretty randomly scattered around. I'll go ahead and select those again, Control Delete to delete all of them. And now let's change some of the numbers we're passing in. We'll change the bearing, and we'll say it's going to be from 1 to 90 and see what happens. And now put them all in that right upper quadrant. Haven't actually tested it when you do it with a narrower band, so let's try and see what happens when it's 89. Oops, should have deleted all of them. Let's go ahead and delete. Yeah, look at that. They're all in a line. I like that. Okay, so the purpose of placing the reference point is really that's the possible location. We're going to sort of test for possible locations on where we want to move the unit to. The reference point itself has a latitude and a longitude, just like the unit does. And then we're going to use a function for getting the global elevation of any longitude and latitude to check the elevation. And if the elevation is below whatever the depth is that we set up here, then that's where we're going to move the ship to. So next thing we're going to want to do is, right now I'm just running the function as it is. I want it to be an actual variable, so I'm going to say it's local point equals that, and then the point, if we print it, the point is made up of these different things, latitude and longitude. I can actually access the point's latitude, and we'll just do this to show it. Those are all the latitudes. You can do the same thing for the longitude. So we can plug point.latitude and point.longitude into the get world elevation function, I think is what it's called. So we're going to do another variable, local elevation equals, and then we just need to figure out what that function really is called. I think it's called world. Yeah. So local elevation is going to be equal to world get elevation, and then my guess is that's going to be inside brackets, and we're going to say latitude equals and that's going to be point.latitude, comma longitude, whoops, and with any luck that'll give us the elevation, so we're going to print the elevation. And the print statements, again, are just so that you can check your work. Without the print statements, there's no way for me to really know what's going on, and I'm not 100% sure this is actually the way to do this, so I need to be doing this as I go. And it doesn't like it. World get elevation missing longitude. And that's because it can't spell. And there you go, look at that. So those are the, I'm printing out the point latitude, which is pointless. Let's get rid of that. And then below it, it's telling you the depth of all those numbers. So let's get rid of those. We've got a lot of them. And let's go back up to where we're doing this. Let's change this back to, let's do another example, and we'll say it's 90 to 270. So it'll be anything below where the unit is. And let's change the distance again. Let's do 200 miles this time. And let's change the elevation. There's a lot of deep water here. We'll change that to 3,000. I believe this is meters, so those are 4,500 meters. So it's going to be, should just be a few things here. It shouldn't get into here because that shouldn't be deep enough. Yep. So our elevation check 3,000. That's not going to pass. That one's going to pass. Not pass. Not pass. Going to pass. So maybe half of them are going to pass. And look, now they're further away. So that's not checking the, that was still placing the points randomly, but it wasn't checking the elevation. So now we need to check the elevation. And we're going to do an if elevation is less than depth, because I'm going for subs more or less. I want to make sure the water is at least the depth that I'm setting up here. Then, so what we're really going to do is move the unit. So somewhere in here, probably up above, we should get the unit wrapper for this unit here. So I'm going to say local U equals and edit. And then name equals unit. And I'm just going to do the name. I don't need to do the side or the GUID because I only have one unit in this whole scenario. If your units are named totally uniquely, then all you need is the name. If you're going to do this on something where there's a bunch of subs that all have the same name, then you need to use the GUID. And also, if the same sub is going to be on multiple different sides, then you need to specify the side. I'm pretty careful about that type of stuff, so in this situation, I don't need that, especially with just the one unit. So now that I have that unit that we're setting up here, and we should probably check this to make sure we're actually doing it. And we've got an error, of course. And that's because we have this elevation that we didn't finish. That's where I was going to need the unit. So let's just make sure. Interesting. Got a bunch of nils. I wonder what the nil is for. Can't be for the unit. It's because I needed to have these in quotes. And let's just change this to yes. So that'll be, if the elevation is deep enough, it'll say yes. If not, it'll say no. Yes, yes, no, yes, no. Yep. So that seems to be working. Let's get rid of this and this. And now what are we going to do? We've got the U. So if the elevation is below the depth, then we want to go ahead and move the ship there. And to do that, all you have to do is take the U, just like up here, I could print u.latitude. What did that print out at the top? Yeah, it did all this. I can access this latitude by just doing u.latitude. And there is the latitude right there. Just like you can access that value of what it is currently, you can set it also by doing that same thing. So if the elevation is deep enough, I want to set the latitude of this unit that we're moving to whatever the latitude is of this point. So if the elevation is deep enough, I want to u.latitude equals point.latitude. And then same for the longitude. And now if that's actually going to move the ship, I want it to stop at that point. I don't want to go through any more iterations of putting out reference points because we don't need to. And to do that, you just type in return. That's the command to exit the function, which we don't have a function yet. This is just code. We're going to wrap this into a function as we get to the end. So right now, let's go back and get rid of all of these reference points. Control delete. Back to our code. We're telling it to run through it 20 times or until the elevation is below the depth, at which point it's going to move the ship, or what is this, a sub? It's going to move the sub, and then it's going to exit. So let's run it and see what happens. This is where it is right now, and boom, it just moved it right on top of that reference point, and you can see it created these other ones, and these other ones are not at a depth that meets our depth requirement. So now I'm going to go ahead and delete these reference points again. And now you'll notice that we don't actually need those reference points, so why do we even have them in there? Once we set this variable called point to that add reference point, we no longer need the reference point, so we can delete the reference point right here. And I don't know exactly how to do that, so we are going to figure out what it is. Delete reference point. There it is right there. Send edit. Delete reference point, and then it wants a selector, which we're going to do as the name, and I don't think we finished that part. So send edit, delete reference point. Oh, we did. We named it possible. What we also want to do is add the index of where we are in the for loop. So it's going to be possible and then .i. Possible is a string. It's inside quotes. Anytime you want to concatenate a string with a variable, you need to do this ... syntax. And so that should be possible 1, possible 2, possible 3. And we should, let's go ahead and check that while we're at it. And it doesn't like that. It needs a side. Delete reference point side. And we didn't put anything in here. Side equals side. And I'm going to go ahead and comment that out since we don't actually have anything to delete yet, because I want to make sure I'm naming them right. I'm naming them properly. And that was possible 1 right there. There's another one in there. I'm going to manually move it. That's possible 1. Interesting. I'm a little skeptical of that. Let's go back and make sure what we're doing here. I'm going to change this so it's more likely to run through more of them so I can see what their numbers are. And again, it's number 1. That didn't work because it was too deep there. Maybe now it'll work. Yep. Possible 7. Possible 2. Oops. Possible 13. So now the naming of the reference points is working. We need that so that we can delete it. So the side is the side. Name is equal to same as the name here. So it's in the loop. It's going to create the reference point and it's going to immediately delete it. But since we're setting the reference point equal to a variable, we've already captured the data that's in that. So there won't end up being any reference points now when we do this. And let's see what happens. And nothing happened. Because none of them were deep enough. So we should, if elevation, else. We should put a little message in there if it's the else, if it doesn't match if the elevation isn't lower than the depth that we set, we should put up a note so we know what happened. Now when we run it again, that's interesting. It's saying no suitable location. That's because it's in the loop. That's sort of okay. So if we change this depth back to 1,000, then I think it'll work. Boom, found it on the first try. And let's run it again just so we can see if the ship moves. Yep, ship's moving. Interesting, it went over the, wow, it went over into the Pacific. Okay, so we're looking pretty good. Is there anything else we need to do to the code? We're checking for the depth. We're checking for the bearing. So the only thing that we're not really checking is to see whether that unit exists. We probably should do a check for that so that we can handle the errors a little bit better. In my experience, in this simple of an example, it's not going to matter. But the way you would do that is if the little tilde and the equal sign is not equal to nil, then go ahead and do all this stuff, and then you need another end statement at the bottom. And then we could put an else here. And this is going to say unit doesn't exist. And this no suitable location, unit not moved. I guess that can be as part of the loop, but I normally would put it at the bottom. So it happened once after you went through this for I equals 1 to 20. I kind of want a message that it went through 20 times. I'm just off by a little bit on where this is after this end. All right, let's move it around, and we can test that by making this 10,000. And there, it tried. Are we still printing the unit latitude? Let's get rid of that, clean that up. So it tried all these depths, and when it got to the end, no suitable location found, unit not moved. And then if we delete this unit, and now if we run it, it's going to give an error before it gets anywhere because we're in the console. If we do, let's see, that was at the very top of this page. If we emulate it in the game, tool emulate no console equals true. Put that on the first line. Hopefully this will be nice if this was a checkbox in here. And we run it again. I don't think it, probably have to check that in the Lua log. Yeah. So in the Lua history log, it printed unit does not exist after it got the error because in the game it will continue to run through the code even though it got an error. Like I said, that's probably not needed in this simple of a example, but it's good form to do that to check for nil. Let's see. So let's go back here. We need to add in another unit since we deleted that. And let's just check this again with a more normal number, 1,000 feet where it's at. That's pretty deep. And since I deleted that unit, I need to get the unit name again from this. Press R to bring up the rename part. Copy that to the clipboard. That was off the screen. And try this again. There. Now it's moving around. No suitable. Wow, it's in like a weird little area there where the depth just happens to be really deep right there, but it's surrounded by a bunch of shallow water and a distance of 200 miles. Oh, because we're doing, that's right, we put the bearing min and max so that it was only looking below it. There we go. Now it's back to moving around anywhere. And you notice that I gave it a path before I did any of this. It keeps that path. It's just remembering where this first waypoint is, and wherever you move it to, it's going to head towards that waypoint again. All right, so that's our code is working pretty well. This is, at this point, this is just Lua code. It's not an actual function. So what we want it to be is a function, and the reason for that is going to be that it's easier to run it on multiple units. Say you have more, if you have 10 subs and you want them all to move randomly, this is a bunch of code to duplicate each time just to do that. So what you want it to do is you want to give it a function, you want to make it a function, and to do that you just call it a function and give it a name. And we're going to call the function place ship randomly. So this really could be for any unit. I'm just checking the depth to make sure it's below a certain depth to move a sub around primarily, although it's certainly going to work with ships. And then checking the depth will also keep it away from shallow waters right near the shoreline, which is always good. You could also do this to move any, it could be a facility, and then you could just skip the depth part. So calling the function place ship randomly, it really could be called something else. And now when you call the function, you're going to want to pass in these parameters. The depth, the bmin, bmax, distance, and the unit and the side. And the way you do that is that after the function, you have a couple of parentheses, and in there you give each one of these things a name that you then reference within the function. And I think at the bottom of the function it needs its own end. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there now. And then the order that you put these parameters in is also the way you're going to call it. So down here, when we go to call the function, we're going to call you don't have to say function, you just give it the name of the function and then you pass in the parameters. All that has to happen is that these things have to be in the same order as here. So here they're going to be sort of variable names that you're going to use within the function, and those are going to be these 6 things, I believe. So we'll start, kind of looks like we should start at the bottom with side, unit, and we can, I've got some weird naming going on here where I'm using the same names, but I think that's okay. All right, so side, unit, distance, bmax, bmin, depth, those are the things. And these same names here, what I call them inside the function, bmax, distance, bmin. So that's all going to work. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete these. And then down here at the bottom, I just need to pass in these things in this order. And so that's going to be, the side is blue. comma. The next one is the units. I wonder if I still have that on the clipboard. Yep. Next thing is the distance. What's the distance around you want it to be? Let's do one that's closer in. We'll say 50 miles. The bearing max. Boy, I think these should be the other way around. Bearing minimum. Bearing max. Yep. And so the minimum is going to be, let's do something, we'll say it's 1 and then 90, so it'll be anything northeast. And then the depth, we'll just say it's 500. So now when I run this, and notice how I'm calling the function down below where I defined the function, I can't put this part up at the top. We'll put it up there just to show you, because the function hasn't loaded and it's going to see place ship randomly. It's going to go look for a function called place ship randomly, but it's not going to exist. So I should get some sort of an error when I do this. Yep, attempted to call a global place ship randomly, but there is no such thing. So I'm going to put it back down at the bottom. And now I can sit here and run it as many times as I want, and it's moving around. And notice how it's sort of creeping up that way because we're telling it to only look in that direction. And this is where the depth, maybe we should make that 1500. It's eventually not going to make it across Cuba, I don't think. Uh-oh, how did that work? That shouldn't have worked. Ah, because I did a positive number. This has to be negative. A little bit confusing there. Let's try this again. And now I can't find anything that's that deep. Change it to 500. Let's change. Oh, we're only doing 50 miles. Let's do 250. There. Ooh, now where to go? And so it keeps going that way because of the bearing. So let's change this back to 300. And now it's moving around more like you would expect. So it's not 360, it's still, oh, there it goes, works back. Okay, so now why did we go to the effort to make this into a function? That one of the things you could do is if you had a bunch of ships, you could put them all into a table and then run them through this function like this, or you could just copy this and say you have 4 units. Let's move this guy back over here and we'll duplicate him. Now those all have the same name, so I'm going to rename some of these. Just going to call that -2. That's going to be -3. And that's going to be -4. And now when we go back to the function, you're going to have that one. You're going to have -2, -3, -4. And you could mix this information up for every one of these, and you wouldn't have to duplicate all of this code. So this code could exist once. You could actually load it in on scenario load and have that repeat every time in case it's a save. And then you could just have your Lua action call just this, and it would be able to find the function from the load event initially when the scenario loads. So let's see if this is going to work. All 4 of these should move. Yep. So now another thing you could do that I was just thinking about is right now these are all at a depth of 131. What if you wanted to mix that up so they were all different? Somewhere in here, you're checking, you're setting the u.latitude. You could also do, I think you can actually use depth. I don't know what the number is going to be. u.depth equals, we're forgetting the random seed that should be in here. Math.random. All right, we could do between, what is this, 131 and depth, and then if we change the depth, yeah, I think that would give you a random number. Let's see what happens when we do that. Unexpected symbol, line 16, u.depth equals, so maybe we need to do a new one, local new depth equals, that doesn't like line 17, u.depth. Okay, so I think it didn't like my math.random thing with a negative number, so I put a negative sign in front of depth, which is a negative number, which makes it a positive number. And so if you say you want your random depth to be between 135 and the depth that you're putting in here, keep in mind that's meters. That's 1,500 feet. That's going to be below. I guess this is a bad example. Unless you change that to maybe 200. And 135, that's in meters, so I'm trying to find something that's around 131, so that's what, 40, we'll say. And then we'll see if this part works. Altitude equals new depth, and I'm going to have to put a negative sign on that, and I wonder if that'll flip it to a negative number. That one's at minus 581, that one's at minus 505, 381. That worked pretty good. All right. So that was basically that was how to make a basic function. Function needs to be loaded before you call the function, and it just makes it so that it's easier to reuse the same code.